The private investigator rose to his feet in that courtroom and spoke 5 words that froze the air. My cousin Lucas's champagne glass slipped and shattered right there in his hand. The homeless man was me. That was the moment everything cracked open. We realized my billionaire uncle, Gerald Marlowe, had been testing us all for an entire year, and not one of us had the faintest clue we'd been under a microscope the whole time. Every word we spoke, every decision we made, every private moment we thought was ours alone had been recorded and studied. The man whose fortune we'd spent 6 brutal months clawing at each other over had orchestrated the most elaborate test of character I've ever seen. My name's Ethan Marlowe, and what I'm about to tell you is how my uncle's death stripped every mask from our faces, revealing the best and worst buried in all of us. Uncle Gerald didn't just build an empire worth $800 million from nothing. He built it on grit, risk, and unshakable instinct. But when it came time to decide his legacy, he chose not to pass down wealth. He wanted to pass down something rarer, something he called human kindness. To understand what happened, you've got to know the players, because Uncle Gerald studied us like specimens in a lab. There was Gerald himself, 74, when his heart finally gave out. A shipping tycoon who started with one rusted old freighter and grew it into Marlowe Shipping International. The man could bargain with Somali pirates or senators and walk away with both shaking his hand. But for all his genius, he never figured out how to say I love you without attaching a dollar sign. Then there was Lucas, my oldest cousin at 35, a Wall Street hotshot in tailored suits worth more than my car. He kept an Excel sheet tracking every favor ever owed to him, convinced that relationships were just transactions with better lighting. He'd worked at Uncle Gerald's company since college, grooming himself to inherit the throne. Lucas once told me, "Emotion's just weakness in a fancy tie." And he lived like that every single day. Next came Clara, 32 and sharp enough to cut glass with a smile. She'd become one of the East Coast's top luxury real estate agents, the kind who closed penthouse deals over martinis and called senators by their first names. Clara had this grin that made you instinctively pat your pocket to check if your wallet was still there. And then there was Nathan, the youngest at 30, our family's favorite cautionary tale. He'd run 7 businesses straight into the ground and burned through twice as many of Uncle Gerald's loans. But unlike the others, Nathan wore his desperation like cologne, thick, sour, and impossible to ignore. My mother, Helen Marlowe, was Gerald's kid sister, though you'd never guess they shared DNA. While he was busy building empires, she was baking birthday cakes in her Little Queen's bakery. She'd married my dad, Robert Marlowe, a mechanic who could bring any engine back to life, but never figured out how to repair his relationship with the Marlowe money train. And then there's me, Bryce, 28, high school chemistry teacher. Most of my students were more interested in whether I could cook meth like that guy from TV than in actual science. I was the family outlier, the guy who chose lesson plans over stock plans, who drove a beat-up 10-year-old Honda while my cousins compared yacht sizes. What nobody in that courtroom knew, what Uncle Gerald had hidden from every one of us, was that he'd been dying for 2 long years. His heart had been failing, one faint beat at a time. And in those final months, he wasn't asking who deserved his fortune. He was trying to figure out who least deserved it. The answer to that question would tear our family apart and rebuild it from the ground up. The day Uncle Gerald died, I was in my classroom teaching about chemical reactions, how a catalyst can expose what elements are truly made of. I didn't realize my uncle had decided to become that catalyst himself. He'd already set in motion an explosion that would reveal exactly who we were when we thought nobody was watching. But someone was watching. Someone always was. When that investigator stood up and revealed what Gerald had planned, my cousins didn't just go pale, they went translucent. You could almost see straight through to every ugly thought they'd hidden, every selfish calculation they'd made while pretending to grieve. This is the story of how my uncle's final test turned his funeral into a resurrection, and how the poorest Marlowe became the richest in ways money could never measure. It began with a death, spiraled into a war, and ended with a revelation that forever changed what we believed about family, wealth, and the true price of a soul. Growing up as Gerald Marlowe's nephew was like living in 2 separate worlds. My cousins spent their summers aboard his yacht, learning global trade routes and the art of negotiation. I spent mine behind the counter at my mom's bakery, discovering that the secret to perfect bread was patience, and that sometimes The richest talks happen over the cheapest coffee. Uncle Gerald built his empire by moving goods across oceans. In 1973, he bought his first ship, a rusted freighter named the Helen Marlowe Marie after my mom. He'd scraped together every dollar from dock work and borrowed the rest from a loan shark who promised to break his legs if he missed a payment. By the time I came along, he owned 200 vessels and ran trade routes that stretched from Shanghai to Seattle, Hamburg to Houston. Your uncle could sell ice to Eskimos, my dad once said, tightening bolts on our garage door. But he couldn't hand out a compliment if his life depended on it. Dad was right. To Uncle Gerald, love was a contract, affection a business arrangement. Every family gathering felt like a shareholders' meeting where everyone was jockeying for position. All of us trying to prove our value in the only language he seemed to understand, profit. I'll never forget the Thanksgiving before he died. We were all at his estate in Connecticut, a 40-room mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. The dining table could seat 30, but there were only 8 of us, spread out like islands in a sea of polished mahogany. Bryce doesn't have the killer instinct. Uncle Gerald announced over the turkey, speaking to my mother but staring straight at me. Teaching kids won't make him rich, Helen Marlowe. Maybe he doesn't want to be rich, Gerald, my mother said calmly, setting her fork down like she was laying down a card in a game she knew she wouldn't win. Maybe he just wants to be happy. Happiness doesn't pay for heart surgery when you're 70. He shot back, his voice sharp enough to cut through the clinking silverware. There was something in his tone that made me glance up, a faint tremor, like a hairline crack in a foundation you don't notice until the whole house starts leaning. Lucas chuckled, that dry, polished Wall Street laugh that sounded less like amusement and more like money being counted. Bryce thinks he's noble, choosing poverty, he said. But we all know teachers who win the lottery don't show up for class on Monday. I had one who did, I said quietly. Mrs. Levin. She won $4 million in the Powerball, came back the next semester anyway. Said she wasn't done yet. Then she was an idiot, Clara said flatly, inspecting her manicured nails. $4 million, properly invested, could fund an entire school district. Or, I countered, maybe she just understood that not everything worth doing comes with compound interest. Uncle Gerald watched us in silence, his cold gray eyes flicking between us like a hawk scanning for weakness. He didn't say a word, just kept carving his turkey with surgical precision. But when I glanced up, I caught him studying me differently, not with approval, but with curiosity, like I was a shipping route he hadn't charted before. Family gatherings always followed the same script. Lucas would brag about his latest merger, the numbers ballooning bigger every year, like he was inflating an ego we all knew would eventually burst. Clara would weave tales of penthouse sales and celebrity clients, each name drop carefully placed to remind us how high she'd climbed. Nathan, meanwhile, would pitch whatever can't-miss business idea he'd cooked up that month, his enthusiasm inversely proportional to how doomed it actually was. At what turned out to be Uncle Gerald's last 4th of July party, Lucas smirked over his martini and said, "You still driving that old Honda, Bryce? I could hook you up with my Ferrari. Dealer discount? Family rate?" I asked, half smiling. "I'll pass." I watched Uncle Gerald from across the lawn, standing by the marble fountain, alone as always, eyes scanning the crowd like a man taking inventory. There was something different about him that night, though, a stillness, the kind you see in the ocean before a storm. "A man isn't what he drives," he said suddenly, appearing beside us like he'd stepped out of thin air. Lucas actually jumped. "A man is what he does when no one's watching." For a second, neither of us spoke. It wasn't like him to say something so human. His wisdom usually came wrapped in dollar signs, not philosophy. But that night, he just smiled. A small, weary smile that made him look years younger, and walked away. I didn't know then that he'd already hired the private investigator, that every conversation, every choice, every argument was being quietly recorded and studied. All I knew was that something under the surface was shifting, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, building up pressure for an earthquake that would change everything we thought we knew about family. The call came on a Tuesday morning, halfway through second period. I was explaining molecular bonds to 32 bored sophomores when my phone buzzed against the desk. The caller ID said Principal Carter. That usually meant someone was either dead or arrested. In the Marlowe family, both were equally likely. "Bryce," "You need to come to my office," Carter said the moment I stepped into the hallway. "Your mother called. It's about your uncle." Uncle Gerald had collapsed at 9:47 a.m. right there in his office, his hand still gripping a contract for a new Panama Canal shipping route. A massive heart attack. The cleaning lady found him slumped over his desk, and by the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. 74 years of empire building, and it all ended between two signatures on a deal he'd never finish. The funeral was held at St. Catherine's Cathedral, the same church where he'd been baptized decades ago. The entire shipping world showed up, CEOs from Maersk, Costco executives, port authorities from 6 continents. Enough lawyers to populate a small nation. The family section, though, told a different story. We sat there like actors in a play who'd forgotten their lines, pretending grief, calculating percentages. "He looks peaceful," Clara whispered to Lucas during the service, her eyes scanning the crowd instead of the casket. "Probably tallying net worth per pew." "He never looked peaceful a day in his life," Lucas muttered, adjusting his black Armani jacket for the 4th time. "Peaceful men don't build empires." Nathan sat between them, sweating despite the cathedral's cool air, tapping his fingers on his thigh in a nervous rhythm that reeked of unpaid debts and last chances. My parents were beside me, Mom crying genuine tears, Dad holding her hand with those same oil-stained fingers he could never quite scrub clean, even for a funeral. I was the only one who noticed the small detail that would have made Uncle Gerald furious. The flowers were wrong. Lilies, his least favorite. He called them death flowers. He'd always loved roses, yellow ones from his own garden, the ones he'd pruned every Sunday morning like it was therapy. They'd been his pride, his quiet obsession, the only thing besides his empire he'd ever built with his bare hands. 3 days after the burial, the family got the call. We were to meet at Hale and Associates, downtown Manhattan. The building was a glass and steel tower that seemed to scrape the clouds and look down on the rest of the city like it owned the place. Simon Hale, the Marlowe family's lawyer for 3 decades, greeted us in his usual uniform. A perfectly pressed 3-piece suit and those wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like he'd been born reading contracts. "Thank you all for coming," he said, motioning toward a massive conference table polished enough to see your reflection. "There's been a development regarding Mr. Marlowe's estate." Development? Lucas leaned forward, already assuming he'd be signing something. "Just read the will, and let's get this over with." Hale took off his glasses, cleaned them carefully, and delivered the sentence that detonated the room. "Mr. Marlowe's will cannot be located." For exactly 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then chaos erupted. "That's impossible." Lucas slammed his fist against the table so hard the water glasses rattled. "He told me everything was finalized. He promised the company would stay in family hands, that I'd lead it forward." He caught himself, but the entitlement hung in the air like smoke. We all heard it. The assumption that the Marlowe empire was his by default, like inheritance was gravity, and he was the lowest point. "Without a will," Hale continued calmly, "the estate enters probate. As Mr. Marlowe's only living relatives, you'll need to petition the court for distribution. The process could take months, possibly years." "Years?" Nathan's voice cracked, high and panicked, like a kid being told Christmas was canceled. "I can't wait years. I've got creditors breathing down my neck who won't wait years," Nathan said, frustration leaking into his voice. "That's your problem," Clara snapped back, already scrolling through her phone to call her lawyer. "The rest of us can afford to handle this properly." The moment we walked out of that meeting, the sides were drawn clear as day. Within 24 hours, Lucas had brought in a legal army from Sherman and Sterling, the kind of corporate sharks who chewed through smaller firms before breakfast. Clara countered by hiring a forensic accountant to dissect every penny and asset, down to the last paperclip sitting in Uncle Harlan's desk drawer. Nathan, meanwhile, was unraveling fast. The bitterness poured out of him in the form of wild accusations, claims that Lucas had manipulated Uncle Harlan in his final years, whispering things about forged signatures, fraud, even elder abuse. That's when it hit me. The war for Uncle Harlan's empire had officially begun. None of us realized that we were walking straight into a trap, one Harlan himself had set long before he died. 6 months deep into that legal bloodbath, with lawyers draining the estate at $5,000 an hour, Hale called yet another emergency meeting. By that point, We'd spent more money fighting each other than most folks would see in their entire lifetime. Family dinners had turned into cross-examinations. Every word you spoke could, and probably would, show up in a deposition later. When we entered the conference room this time, Hale wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was a woman in her mid-50s, sharp gray hair tied back tight, eyes cold and assessing. She held a brown leather briefcase on her lap, like it contained the launch codes to a missile. Her posture was rigid, coiled, the kind of stillness you only see in someone who's used to waiting for the perfect shot. "This is Miss Dana Krell," Hale said, his tone carrying that heavy authority that made everyone stop mid-scroll. "She's a private investigator who's been working for Mr. Marlowe's estate for the past 18 months. You could feel the math click in everyone's heads at the same time. 18 months. Uncle Harlan had only been dead for 6. What kind of twisted game is this? Lucas shot to his feet, face turning that dangerous shade of red that usually meant someone was about to get fired or sued. "You're telling me Harlan hired someone to spy on us while he was still alive?" "I'm telling you," Hale replied, pulling a sealed envelope from his safe like he was opening an ancient relic, "that Mr. Marlowe foresaw this exact scenario. This," he said, placing the envelope on the table, "is his true will, to be opened only after Miss Krell completed her work and, in his words, after you all revealed your true colors." My mother instinctively reached for my father's hand. Clara's manicured nails dug into the armrest so hard I thought the leather might tear. Nathan looked like he was about to throw up into the crystal water pitcher. And me? I just sat there, replaying something Uncle Harlan once told me over a late-night chess game. The best move is always the one your opponent never sees coming. Hale slid the silver letter opener under the seal, the sound of paper tearing echoing like a crack of thunder in that silent room. He unfolded the documents with the care of a surgeon, cleared his throat, and began to read in a voice that could have announced a terminal diagnosis. "I, Gerald Jordan Marlowe, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. But first, let me tell you a story." He looked up briefly, then continued. "When I was building my company, I learned that you don't judge a ship by how it sails in calm waters, but by how it handles the storm. The same goes for people. So, I decided to create a storm." Hale glanced over his glasses before continuing. "I leave my entire estate, every asset, holding, and controlling interest in Marlowe Shipping International, to the family member who has shown the most genuine kindness, compassion, and humanity during the 12 months before my passing. Miss Dana Krell has been tasked with observing and documenting all interactions, both with myself and with others." He paused just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. "She has led a team of observers, conducted surveillance, and prepared detailed reports on each potential heir." "This is insane," Lucas barked. "You can't spy on people and call it a will. That's entrapment. It's illegal. It's perfectly legal." Hale cut him off smoothly. "Mr. Marlowe's money, Mr. Marlowe's rules. Miss Krell, if you would please." Dana stood up slowly, like a prosecutor stepping before a jury. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a tablet, and began swiping through what looked like thousands of documents, photos, and video clips. "For the past year," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "my team and I have observed each of you in a variety of circumstances. We've documented your interactions with service workers, the homeless, employees, strangers in need, and, of course, with Mr. Marlowe himself." She tapped the tablet, and the conference room's massive screen flickered to life. There, on the screen, was the front entrance of Marlowe Shipping headquarters, and the familiar sight of a bundled-up homeless man sitting just outside. "Every morning for 3 months, a homeless man sat here," Krell said. "From December through February, the coldest months of the year. That man was my colleague, retired NYPD Detective Victor Ames." The footage played. The man huddled beneath a blanket, his cardboard sign propped against the wall. It read, "Invisible to everyone but God." "Each of you walked past him, day after day," Krell continued. "Your responses were recorded, analyzed, and categorized. My cousins shifted in their chairs, restless and guilty. I remembered that man. Remembered stopping to hand him coffee and sandwiches on those freezing mornings when I went to see Uncle Harlan for our Sunday chess games. I hadn't done it for anyone's approval. I just couldn't stand walking past him, seeing how cold he looked. But that, Krell said. Her finger hovering over the next slide like a judge about to issue a verdict was only one of many tests. She connected her tablet to the main screen again, and suddenly we were all watching ourselves, filmed, analyzed, judged by strangers we never even knew existed. The first clip showed Lucas stepping around the homeless man, not just ignoring him, but practically recoiling, as if kindness were something contagious. "Mr. Lucas Marlowe," Krell began, her tone crisp and detached, eyes fixed on the tablet. 112 recorded encounters. 0 acknowledgments. She flipped a page in her notes. "On January 15th, you called building security to have the homeless man removed. The temperature that day was 18 degrees. Lucas's jaw tightened, his voice a low growl. "He was blocking the entrance. That's a liability issue." "He was sitting 3 feet from the door," Krell replied evenly, not missing a beat. Then, with one swipe, the next video appeared. "On April 2nd, she continued, "you instructed your secretary to mislead the Tanaka Maritime about delayed payments, while you were finalizing the purchase of a $7 million vacation home in the Hamptons. On May 18th, you terminated warehouse worker Mark Jensen 2 days before his pension vested. Your decision saved the company $40,000 and cost him his retirement." "That was a performance issue," Lucas shot back defensively. "Mr. Jensen," Krell said, glancing up, "worked for Marlowe Shipping for 19 years and 11 months. His performance reviews were consistently outstanding, until you needed to trim expenses to secure your quarterly bonus." She turned toward Clara, who straightened in her seat, wearing that same confident smile she used to close multi-million-dollar real estate deals. "Ms. Clara Marlowe," Krell continued, "you persuaded Ruth Calloway, an 83-year-old widow suffering from early-stage dementia, to sell her Brooklyn home for 60% of its market value. 4 months later, you resold it for a $2 million profit. That same month, you donated $50,000 to charity, after confirming Forbes would feature the story." "Business is business," Clara said coolly, not even flinching. "And that donation helped hundreds of children." "It helped your reputation," Krell countered. "The children were just collateral benefits." Then her gaze shifted to Nathan. He was already shrinking into himself, looking like a kid caught stealing lunch money. "Mr. Nathan Marlowe," Krell said, "you created a GoFundMe campaign claiming to support unemployed dock workers during the Port Authority strike. You raised $300,000. She paused. "Only $60,000 reached the workers. The remaining $240,000 went toward what you described as administrative expenses, which included the purchase of a new Mercedes and a trip to Monaco." "I was managing the fund," Nathan stammered. "Management deserves compensation." "Perhaps," Krell replied, her tone cooling like the air before a thunderstorm. "But there was one member of this family whose behavior stood in complete contrast to everything we've seen so far." Her eyes found mine, and my stomach dropped as if I'd missed a stare. "Mr. Ethan Marlowe," she said, "you visited your uncle every Sunday, without fail, not in his office, but at his home. You played chess, listened to his stories about the early days of his business, and brought him books from your school library because he once mentioned missing fiction." The screen flickered, showing me entering Uncle Harlan's house through the side door, arms full of worn paperbacks. "But more importantly," Krell said, "it was your treatment of others that stood out." The footage changed again, to the homeless man outside Marlowe Shipping. "You brought him coffee and a sandwich every morning before visiting your uncle," she narrated. "You learned his name, Victor, remembered he was diabetic, and started bringing him sugar-free cookies instead of regular ones. You had no idea you were being watched. You did it simply because winter is cold and people deserve dignity." More videos followed, me helping an elderly woman in a grocery store reach something from a high shelf, me tutoring students after school for free, me shoveling my neighbor's driveway at dawn before heading to work. "The student, Jordan Ellis," Krell said. "His family couldn't afford college application fees. You paid them yourself, $800 from your teacher's salary. When he was accepted to Columbia, you gave his mother your car because hers had broken down and she needed transportation to get to work. You gave away your car," my father blurted out, shock written across his face. "It was just the Honda," I muttered, feeling exposed, like someone had turned my pockets inside out in public. Krell clicked again, her tone softening but her authority undimmed. But the most revealing moment occurred on September 23rd, 1 month before Mr. Marlowe's death. The footage shifted to Uncle Harlan's study. He was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face purple with pain. I appeared in the doorway, arriving early for our chess game, dropping my books, rushing to his side. My voice came through the speakers. "It's okay, Uncle Harlan. The ambulance is coming. Just breathe. Tell me about that storm off Cape Horn. You never finished that story." The room was silent as the video played. 12 long minutes of me, keeping him conscious, talking, making him laugh even as he fought for air. Then came his voice, weak, trembling, but clear. "Please don't tell anyone about this. If they know I'm weak, the sharks will circle. Your secret's safe with me," I'd said, holding his hand. "But you need to see a doctor." Krell turned off the screen. "Mr. Ethan Marlowe never disclosed this incident," she said, "even though it could have strengthened his legal claim to the estate. He protected Mr. Marlowe's dignity at the cost of his own advantage. That, ladies and gentlemen, is genuine compassion." Hale rose from his chair like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "The will is clear," he said solemnly, "and legally airtight. The entirety of the Marlowe estate, valued at $800 million, including all assets, holdings, Marlowe Shipping International, the properties in Connecticut, Manhattan, Miami, and San Francisco, the art collection, and the yacht, are hereby awarded to Ethan Marlowe." The room erupted like someone had tossed a grenade into a hornet's nest. Lucas leapt to his feet, so fast his chair slammed into the wall. "This is fraud. Manipulation. I'll fight this until there's nothing left but dust and legal bills." "You can't buy your way into heaven," Clara screamed, her polished composure finally shattering like fine china dropped on stone. Nathan just dropped his head into his hands and sobbed. Those deep, broken sobs of a man watching his last lifeline slip away. Through all the noise, the shouting, the threats, the grief, I heard Uncle Harlan's voice echo in my head. Something he'd told me during our final chess game, a week before he passed. "You know what I realized too late, Bryce?" he'd said, moving his knight in a pattern I didn't recognize. "I spent 50 years building an empire, but never built a family. Your cousins see dollar signs when they look at me. Their children will inherit wealth, but not meaning. You're the only one who looks at me and sees an old man who loves chess and detective novels, who grows roses because his mother adored them, who built ships because they were the only things that could carry him away from poverty." "Uncle Harlan," I'd started, but he'd lifted a hand, quieting me before I could finish.